I would generally guess that I might know less than 1% of what there is to know about wine. In fact, I can guarantee you I know probably less than 0.001% of what there is to know about wine. I would say I've got the general idea, frankly.
I'm your host, Brian McCann, and this is the Road to Wine Expert podcast. If you listen to my episode of the podcast, you have a general idea of how I came to meet James Glure. James is a master of wine and the founder of Fine Vintage, which served as the approved program provider for my WSET Level 1 class. The WSET Level 1 served as a huge boost to my confidence in the early days of my wine career. While James wasn't the instructor, his team members made for a great day that would prove pivotal in my wine career. It was this early experience that would lead me to take WSET Level 2 and Level 3. I was fortunate enough to spend some time with James, and I was floored when he made the remarks that opened this episode. If a master of wine knows a fraction of a percentage, what chance do regular folk like us have? Well, James let us know that there are plenty of ways to get wine educated and become an expert. Before I turn it over to James, one quick note. I had some technical difficulties when recording this interview, so the audio quality is low. It's actually my backup audio source, because my first one, it didn't really pan out. That said, the content is great. So if you can bear with the first few moments and let your ears adjust to this lo-fi interview, you'll be glad you stuck around for the entire interview. Oh, and if you're like, boy, this sounds good, but I'd rather read it, the transcript is available on the website.
My basic story there is that my parents were actually wine lovers, still are. And while they were studying wine, in fact, for the WSET Level 4 diploma exams in about 1985, I would be in charge of opening bottles from behind the bar and pouring them glasses blind. And so that was basically my introduction, and then they were kind enough at dinner to let me, as a 15-year-old, have a few sips, even maybe a glass. And I have to say, I kind of liked it. I think I probably liked the alcohol component at that age, especially. But and then at the same age, in fact, I went to Madrid, and en route, I decided to stop in Bordeaux because, I had poured some of these wines for my mom and dad. I would be in charge of selecting what to pour. And I went to Saint-Emilion, and I had a lunch there in the square. And it's obviously a pretty magical place with all the vineyards surrounding it. And I thought to myself, there must be a business or something you can do in this. I mean, this doesn't just happen by itself, surely. Maybe there's someone in charge of tasting it. Can you imagine? And so the seed was sort of planted then when I was pretty young. And in fact, so much so that when I was finished university, basically the day I finished university in Vancouver, I got on a plane and I went back to Bordeaux, and I tried to get a job, and in the end, my last day of job hunting, I managed to get a position as a cellar hand in the 1993 vintage, just basically working at a chateau. And I was thrilled about that. Came home, told my mom and dad I got a job. They were so excited. Basically, that's what got the ball rolling. And then I started Fine Vintage because I wanted to work for myself first and foremost. I also started it somewhat out of necessity because the skill I had, or primary skill I had, was in export sales. And I had now, after living in France for many, many years, moved back to Vancouver to raise a family. And there was basically no jobs in export. And I was told I was overqualified to work for an agency. And, you know, there weren't any other options I could find or think of. I thought, geez, I think, you know, maybe we can teach people about wine. Let's try that. And that's basically how we started.
That's pretty amazing. I think it's funny now talking to several people, how all these different crossroads sort of present themselves as you get in the wine world. I think, you know, your story is sort of perfect in that first you just go get a job. You're so excited. And then as you evolve and learn more and discover more of who you are, you keep, you know, reaching these new heights. And then I think, you know, a lot of people end up realizing they want to work for themselves, or in your case, they have to work for themselves because no one will hire them.
Yeah. Well, that's basically it. Yeah. That'd be sad but true. I mean, it was just really a sort of a niche field that, you know, I had expertise in export. And in British Columbia, there's no wineries that are serious about export. And I didn't want to move back to France or, you know, somewhere else. Yeah.
Sure. You know, you've traveled the world over, you've settled in BC, and, you know, it sounds like your heart maybe initially began your love affair in Bordeaux. Do you have one wine region in particular that captivates you more than others, or is there one that you think is something everyone should put on their radar and pay attention to?
Well, I live in Napa Valley now, and have been for 6 years. And Napa always captured my heart. You know, it was, in fact, after university in Vancouver there, that was the first place, so Napa was the first place I tried, you know, to get a job. But with the work permit, being Canadian, it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't possible. Well, that's what I was told. And so being a European passport holder, you know, France was wide open. But Napa, you know, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. You know, it's a fantastic place. I love it. But I suppose, you know, my heart will probably, when it comes to, you know, really exceptional wine, both of them make it, but maybe at the absolute pinnacle, I've had a few beautiful bowls of Bordeaux wines that, you know, that's maybe what really created the magic. I could say the same for California too. You know, I don't know. Your son or your daughter, you know.
It's so funny you mentioned the comparison between Bordeaux and Napa, because today is actually the 41st anniversary of the Paris tasting.
Ah, okay, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and as fate would have it, I actually talked to George Tabor this morning, author of The Judgment of Paris, and the initial article that, you know, spun the wine world on its head 41 years ago. So it's hard to believe. And look at you, you're still torn between the two. And I think many of us are in deciding, you know, which is better. I like your comparison of your son or your daughter. I think that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's amazing. You spoke to George. Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, they're both fantastic. And in fact, you can't compare. I mean, that's the answer. You can't compare. You know, I think in many ways, in fact, it's sort of, it's normal that Napa compares itself to Bordeaux, they shouldn't. I was taking a group of people from Stanford to visit a few properties here just a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of the vintners still, banging on about Bordeaux. I mean, it's just not, I think Napa should be Napa. Anyway, it's natural to always sort of compare to the benchmark, right?
Sure.
But it's surpassed the benchmark often, right? So that's the thing. So, it's just different. It's just different. It's apples and oranges, son or daughter, They're both fantastic.
So speaking of, the educational aspect of Fine Vintage, it's something that I was fortunate enough to take part of. One of the schools in the programs that you do here in Chicago. I actually did the WSET Level 1. It kind of pushed me into that aspect of the formal education of wine. What difficulties did you have faced when you were starting out, to create these wine programs?
It's a good question. I mean, a lot. A lot. Well, we didn't have any resources, so we were broke. Actually, we had I had a credit card with a bit of a credit limit, which quickly got used up, and so we basically start a business, and that was all facets, from legal and licensing to web and marketing and sales, and then product sort of creation, or sort of recreation and administration, and we did a lot of 18 hours a day, sort of 7 days a week, literally, just in the trenches. So learning ourselves, every day, what was working, what wasn't working. And so, there was no shortage of challenges. It was a lot more expensive than, we'd anticipated. And, we definitely, I wouldn't say we were starting a business. I think it's the same for almost everyone in every field all the time. It's a lovely romantic idea. I'm still today, jealous of some friends who have jobs, and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they walk out of there and they're done. And especially one, he never seems to sort of think about work, or very rarely, when he walks out the door. For us, it's it's kind of hard to turn off, right? But that said, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Sure. I think, when you ultimately go into business for yourself, I'm sure it's hard to remember those days when everything was so lean, but, building anything takes time, and it takes money and a lot of dedication. So it's appreciative because it shows in all your work today. And I would definitely recommend people sign up for or seek out one of your classes, or your travel trips as well that you do. And speaking of both of those, is there something you wish, besides passion for wine? Because I think if people are passionate about wine, they would sign up for a class of yours, or would travel with one of your groups. But is there one thing you wish they brought to that experience that would help them enhance it besides just passion for wine?
Everybody's going to bring their own sort of perspective. Some people are sort of almost there just very peripheral, sort of casually, and just want to pick up a few tips. And then there's other people like yourself that really leads to the next level and the next level, and then all of a sudden we see them in the Master of Wine program, or they've started a business, or something along those lines. And I would say that, we sort of started the wine education really somewhat out of sort of an income necessity, and sort of not too many other options that were apparent. But today, I'm so now, 12 plus years on, I'm so happy because on a daily basis, we receive so many emails. In fact, we've had to hire someone to handle these emails because I just can't, reply myself all day long, literally 3, 4, 5 a day. And they all say the same thing, how, these courses and this experience has effectively changed their life, and changed their career, and made them, so happy, and they've discovered something that they're just so into and passionate about. And, and then people write and say, I got a job, as the sommelier at the Four Seasons in Singapore. And if it wasn't for you guys, and da-da-da. And so, we're still obviously, right in the midst of it. But I think that one day, I'm 47 now. I think one day, maybe when I'm sort of, hopefully I make it to 65 or 75 or something like that, I think it will take on even more significance that, we actually, what we've done, has contributed to, in a positive way, to other people's lives. And at the end of the day, it's sort of come about a little bit by happenstance, but it means a lot to me now.
Sure. That makes total sense. I think when you see people's growth, I come from a teaching background, so I used to be a Spanish teacher. And I mean, that was like the one thing that always motivated you, no matter, how bad of a day you had behind the desk or in front of the blackboard, when you could see someone's growth and they were appreciative of it, it made it all worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, look at yourself, I mean, you took a level 1 course in Chicago, which wouldn't have been, decades ago. And now, you're on the phone to George Tabor. And, I just think that is so fantastic. So much sort of admiration and respect for that. And, but it's people's own, get up and go. I mean, these things don't happen by themselves. So it's, your own initiative really that makes the difference. And I guess that's, maybe the same with us. We could sort of sit there and have a, one tiny school in, one small city. But, we've tried to grow our business and respond to demand, really. It's more a question of responding to requests. Why don't you open a school here? There's lots of people here. There's no one doing it here, or God, if you offered a wine tour to Tuscany, I'd sign up. And you hear that enough times, and you're sitting there thinking, and hey, why not? Why not? Let's organize something in Tuscany, or let's start a school in Chicago or Miami or New York or LA or somewhere in Canada. It's exciting for us too. It's the creation is what I love.
Yeah, I totally agree. As someone who loves the creative aspect in all things I do, that act of building something is so satisfying, especially once it's finished, and then it's on to the next thing, like you said. Yeah. Besides, I think, you've alluded to just hard work and desire. What else? What other skills maybe do you need to be a wine expert?
I think that there's on the tasting front, I think that there is a few things. Exposure to some really great wines, which is difficult because of the cost. But when I was 23 or even younger, I was fortunate to be able to taste a lot of really great wines, some of the best wines in the world, just because, I worked for a company that sold them, or, was sort of around people who opened them. And so I didn't have that cost myself. But I think that's something that, is really important. I think being taught how to taste. I was fortunate to be taught by many people, but Michael Schuster, who writes books on the subject. I tracked him down and went and met him in London and asked him if he would, train me, and he did, and that made a huge difference. I think that there is an element of maybe sort of I don't want to say natural born ability, but there are some people who are just good tasters and they figure it out very quickly, and then there's some people who they just don't seem to sort of be able to to get it, or they just miss it consistently. And so people's own personal sensitivities I think do play a role. I think at the end of the day, though, what's really exciting about wine is that if you can maybe prioritize your time in life, which is maybe the key, and is very difficult for everyone, because you have kids, we have young kids, we had young babies when I was doing the Master of Wine exams, and but if you can try and find the time, then wine is great, because you can learn so much by yourself. They're reading books and magazines, and there's often a lot of events, wine tastings, trade tastings, supplier visits, coming through, major cities or significant sized cities. But, if you really put your mind to it, you can basically teach yourself. And in fact, a lot of it is self-taught, right? I mean, you don't just sort of take a WSET course and know it all. In fact, you never know it all, of course. I mean, I would generally guess that I might know less than 1% of what there is to know about wine. In fact, I can guarantee you I know probably less than 0.001% of what there is to know about wine. I would say I've got the general idea, frankly, because it's so voluminous. It's so massive. It's never ending. I mean, it's wine experts, honestly, is if the rest of the world wants to think that, then great, but there's no such thing as like a master doctor, of the body, is there, right? I mean, it's like you might have a few people who sort of know a lot about the body, but there's no one who sort of has it all figured out, right?
That may be the secret, but while I think you just have to come to terms with how overwhelming the wine world is. I think if you sort of realize you'll never know everything, and you come to terms with that, then you can sort of chip away and, hopefully get to 0.001%, or something like that one day. Because even if you do think you know it all, there's always a new vintage, and the world continues to turn. There'll be new wine before you know it.
That's right. It's always evolving, and there's always new places and new wineries and new regions, and sort of rediscovery of grapes that had fallen off the radar. The business of it is changing all the time. Well, that makes it fascinating, but it's not static.
As someone who is, I think, a learner, would probably be my personality type more than anything. Like, I love digging in and seeing how things work. I mean, that's what appeals to me about wine, whether it's the story behind how it was made, where it came from, the geology, the geography, the history of the region. I mean, there's so many aspects. And you're talking about one wine there, and then you talk about multiple wines the world over, and yeah, it just goes on ad infinitum. So there's always something to be learned or information to seek out.
Yeah, 100%.
So I know we're almost closing on that time, but if I had one more question, if you were to start over as a wine novice, is there anything you do differently, or is there a certain piece of advice you might give yourself as you were starting out?
On the education front, I wish I'd gone to a formal institute, and I still might, like UC Davis or Adelaide University, and learned, being formally trained by a sort of a wine post-secondary institute. And in fact, I am going to do that. I might be the oldest guy in the class, but I've been salivating over these wine business programs at Sonoma State and UC Davis and Adelaide, and I don't think I would really make a very good grape grower or winemaker, but I would like to have some more training in those areas. So, the formal education, I can't put enough emphasis on that. Instead of studying political science and international relations at university, I wish I'd studied winemaking or the business of wine. I was really glad that I discovered the WSET courses when I was 19. Otherwise, I was glad that I went to Bordeaux and worked in a chateau and the winery, and then in the commercial end, and I went to Australia and did vintages and a couple of times in California and so on. I would try and do more of that. There's so many wineries in the world who would, be thrilled to have you, for a couple of months. If I was 18 again, I would be going for, a degree at, Adelaide University or Montpellier or UC Davis or Sonoma State, and then I would be traveling around the world, from northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere, working harvests, trying to get involved in the commercial aspects. I would try and make sure that I spent sort of, if I was working a vintage at a winery, do, 1 day or 1 week in the lab, and then, 1 day or 1 week sort of, on the crush pad, and then 1 day and 1 week, or, in the cellar, sort of doing the pump overs or whatever, right? And so move through the entire sort of cycle or chain of the whole wine business as much as you can, in marketing, sales, domestic sales, and export sales, and logistics, and just try and touch every aspect of it, or as many as possible. I don't think that there's any point sort of doing a vintage at a winery for 3 months and just basically dragging hoses around the cellar, and that's all you do for 3 months. After a couple of days, you got the general idea of what's involved in that. So try and touch as many aspects as possible. Work for a retail store. But I don't think you need to work for a retail store for 5 years. I think that you can get the general idea in maybe a few months, even 6 months at most. You learn what consumer behavior is, how a retail shop works, and I think that would then give you the perspective on the entire business, so you can then say, what I want to do is this part, or these parts, and this is what I enjoyed the most, and this is where I think there's the most opportunity, rather than getting pigeonholed into one small area.
That's solid advice. I just wish I could turn back the clock and be 18 again, because it sounds like a life I'd like to live. But there's still time. There's still time for that.
There's still time. I was thinking actually of maybe doing a harvest this year in Napa. I've been planning on doing that for a long time. But, I think it would be fabulous. I was thinking of maybe asking a friend at Opus One or at Heights, if they would have me. A friend said that I'd probably get fired within the first week. Anyway, I'm going to do that. I am going to do that. I really enjoyed working the harvest. You're always learning something new there. It's never the same every year. Different winemakers show you different things. That's the fun.
If you're willing to go back to school and get your hands dirty, I think that all of us should. Anyone in the wine industry should do that. So I appreciate that.
And thank you very much. And I wish you the best of success.
All right, James. Thank you so much. Take care. And then we'll be in touch soon.
Okay, thanks a lot, Brian.
All right, have a good one. Bye.
Thanks for sticking around for the entirety of James Kluwer's interview. I hope you found it as profound as I did. James created something that ultimately led me down the path to pursuing wine as a career and interviewing people like him, so I'm forever in his debt. If you're interested in learning more about James, you can head over to roadtowinexpert.com/James-Kluwer. That's Cluer. Also, you can find the transcript for this episode available on our website. Also, thanks to my podcast manager, Talia Goodman, for pushing me to publish, reminding me of deadlines, and making the podcast a priority. Thanks to Domain for sponsoring this episode of The Road to Wine Expert. Domain is the nation's largest network of wine storage facilities, but they don't just store wine. They can help you in every step of your journey as a wine collector. That means shipping, receiving, importing, organizing, selling, storing, and protecting. Speaking of protecting, Domain offers 2 amazing storage products: Domain cardboard boxes and VineBox, a stackable, flexible wine storage solution. For more information on both those products, you can go to domainstorage.com. They're also available for purchase on Amazon. And finally, thanks to all the musicians who allowed their music to be featured on this podcast by sharing it through the Creative Commons license. If you'd like to know more about these artists and where you can find their amazing music, you can go to roadtowinexpert.com/music. And if you're still here, there's a couple things that you can do to support the podcast. The first of which is visiting roadtowinexpert.com and signing up to receive our emails. That'll keep you in touch about what is happening on both the show and the blog. Also, leave us a review on your platform of choice. It's a great way to say thank you and help us discover more and more people and get on the trending lists and all that jazz. So your review is much appreciated. And last but not least, if you've got questions, comments, concerns, or just looking for advice in general, reach out to me at brian@roadtowinexpert.com. That's BRIAN @roadtowinexpert.com.